and governance systems for avalanche risk reduction. She combines 15 years of field-based experience with academic expertise in anthropology, sociology, resource, and environmental management, and currently works as a professor with APU's Outdoor Studies program and as a pro instructor trainer for ARI. And she's continuing her research with the Fraser University Avalanche Research Program down in Vancouver, Canada, as a PhD student. For her research, she aims to better understand the risk management challenges faced by mountain communities, particularly in remote, underserviced areas that are at greater risk to the effects of climate change. I'm sure it sounds familiar to a lot of us. Through community-led research collaborations, she's eager to support and improve collective understanding of mountain knowledge systems and to contribute more to targeted, equitable, and effective avalanche risk reduction strategies. So let's welcome to the stage Anne St. Clair.
Okay, well, it's really such an honor to be here and have this opportunity to introduce some of the things I've been working on. I've heard such great things about this community, so it's really nice to get this introduction. And so today I had the opportunity to start what I'm hoping is an ongoing conversation about some of the work that we're doing down at the Fraser University Avalanche Research Program. So while I've made the move up here to Anchorage, there's several of us here that are involved in working remotely on this work. And specifically, the work that I'm doing is focused on this question, is how well do the things that we're giving the public actually work for them? And to start this conversation, I was definitely getting carried away. I wanted to share all the things that I've been involved with and the studies that we've been doing as a group for the last 7 years and some of the things I'm working on now. But in order to really get this conversation going, I decided to start with the study that I did for my master's research. And so when I get started here, the first thing you'll notice is that this was part of a university research program that's down in Canada. So I'll be using some of the Canadian forecast products that you'll see. They might be a little different than what you see up here. And so this is a Canadian university, and we are situated on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and those include the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam nations. And this is very similar here to APU, where this research program that I'm a part of is really part of a broader commitment at the university to work directly with these communities and do better moving forward and how we learn together. And it's important that we mention kind of that broader work that we're a part of there. But to bring it to public avalanche safety, some of the things that we're most familiar with or that might come to mind are those dramatic explosives. Maybe sometimes a road gets shut down and you can't get through. So public avalanche safety has different environments that we're working with. In this context, these are really controlled areas. So highways are able to close down a road, use explosives to mitigate the hazard conditions, and ensure that the public is not exposed, and can ensure safety in that way. And that's really similar to ski areas as well. They can also close down certain areas of the ski resort, use explosives to mitigate the hazard conditions, and then allow the public back in. And honestly, this is a bit more of a straightforward context to ensure public safety. But there's this other aspect to avalanche safety which exists more of a free choice environment, and this is our public backcountry recreation context. where we can't close the mountains, and people are free to get out there and walk their dog, clear their minds, participate in activities of their choice. And so oftentimes what we're able to do to support public safety in these environments is we try to give people the best information we can in a form that we think will help them. And we try to give them knowledge, information, and help support their own learning about how they can do this safely. So we have education programs, forecasts, and some signage here and there. And this actually is quite tricky, this free choice environment, and poses quite a complex public safety issue. Oh, I have redundancy in these slides here. That first graph was for Canada. This one is within the United States here, but over the last 10 years, essentially the avalanche fatalities that we've seen across North America, 90% of the folks killed in avalanches are operating in these self-directed activities in these free choice environments. So when we look at public avalanche safety, we're really challenged by this particular context where people are going out and having to manage this on their own. And so we're really interested in how well we're helping this community of recreationists. And essentially, although we can poke fun and say that our industry is not very diverse, when we actually look at the range in which people are experienced and knowledgeable and the skills that they have to manage avalanche risk, we really do have the full range of people going out into the mountains. And as backcountry recreation grows in popularity, this growing diversity just increases the range of people that we need to reach to ensure that they're safe out there. Let's look at the products that we put out. So again, this study that I conducted was down in Canada. So what you see here is the homepage of the Avalanche Canada website, where they have regions with a forecast provided each day that they're in operation. And so to respond to the differences we have in the recreational community, we have designed products with a tiered format, and that's true up here as well. So within the Canada forecast, the first tier of information is this broad avalanche danger scale, which we use here in in Alaska. So this is a 5-level ordinal scale: low, moderate, considerable, high, extreme. And it's really intended to give this overview understanding of the hazard that day. And it's generally broken into elevation bands, either by alpine tree line, below tree line, or an actual elevation metric. At the next scale of complexity, we have the avalanche problem information, same as here in Alaska, which generally this is organized to break down the hazard into a bit more detail to guide recreationists with risk management strategies. So this is broken down into elevation aspect, the likelihood that an avalanche of a certain type will occur, and what size it might be expected to be. And then at the final level, there's this more in-depth complex information in these summaries. There's typically an avalanche activity summary, more detail on the snowpack, and also really in-depth weather information, which is true here in Alaska as well. So while we've designed our products along these lines and with this way of thinking, we have yet to really look at if it's working for people in the way that we intend it to. And our industry has made significant advances with not very many resources to make this information as accurate and consistent and reliable as possible. And that's been really valuable. But we have yet to really focus as much effort on the reciprocal side of the communication, on whether it's utilized, accessed, understood, and applied as the ways that we're hoping it is. And so this was the gap I was hoping to address with this initial study. Because as George Bernard Shaw would say, really hitting the nail on the head here, that the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So we wanted to start to pull back some of the layers and see, is this really an assumption we have that this works for people, or can we actually collect evidence and see how well we're doing with these products and where they could maybe be improved. So this took the form of the research objective of this study was to get to know our recreational community in a new way. So typically we might look at our audience and say, okay, how old are they? What are their gender breakdowns or their economic backgrounds? Or what's their activity type? That's a big one that is a go-to in our industry. But we actually, in this study, wanted to sit down with people and talk about how they plan for going into the backcountry and look for patterns that then we could classify and say into a classification system based on how they're using the avalanche forecast. And this gives us a clearer picture of what our audience is doing with the information that we're giving them. And so that's what I did. I'm gonna nerd out because I love when someone hands me the microphone and I get to talk about research methods. And I guess this was a big transition for me in my experience where I had largely worked in the field, and when I got to do this study, my interest was just really piqued on how to do this type of work and examine these questions. So the way we approached this was we sat down with people for an hour, sometimes an hour and 45 minutes. We did this in-depth interview one-on-one, and it was very strategically ordered and organized. So the first thing we did was we talked to people about their background. How'd you get into the backcountry? How often are you going each year? How many years have you been doing this activity? Then we talked to people specifically about what they do when they're planning to go out there. And we asked about what type of information they're looking for, how that information weighs into the decisions that they're making. And we had this conversation before the interviewer mentioned the avalanche forecast. So it was really up to the participant to bring that into the conversation first. Then we actually brought up the avalanche forecast. We brought up an actual forecast product, but it was the same for everyone. So everyone saw the same information. And we had them go through the website and show us what they would read, what they would think about it, and we actually walked through all the products and got feedback from each user. And then finally, we had them apply the information to terrain. So we had a fun photo sorting exercise, and then we utilized the Ortovox Sam Matten model, where we drew some routes on there, and we had people tell us how they would approach terrain that day with the forecast information. A big part of doing this study was to make sure that our sample was representative as we could make it. So the study was done in 2018 in the Vancouver area. We conducted 46 interviews with folks from Vancouver, Squamish, Whistler, Pemberton, and our goal within this sample was to really capture the full range. So there are snowshoers in our sample, skiers and snowboarders, snowmobilers, and ice climbers. We made sure to talk with people who had never used the avalanche forecast, up to people who were looking at it every day. And we had folks who had, up to that point, done no formal avalanche training, and folks who had been through some really advanced training courses. And so through doing what's called a qualitative applied thematic analysis, essentially we typed up the transcript from all these interviews, and I went through every one and I did a coding process looking for different ways that people were using the forecast information. Oh, I meant to mention that at the time the term bulletin was heavily used within the AvCan office, and so I went with it. But forecast and bulletin are really interchangeable words here. So yes, kind of fell out of fashion. Now I look old-fashioned. This is what emerged from doing that analysis. I really found these 5 key patterns that people were using, and to make it easy for me, I labeled them A, B, C, D, E, and there's a little moniker that matches the letter. I'm gonna go through each of them in detail, but before I do that, I really want to express my gratitude to the folks that I spoke with and participated in this process. I felt like people were really honest and gave us really valuable feedback that was so critical to get these results. As I go through, I would love for you to think about yourself and where you might fall in this typology, or maybe you can see your own progression through the stages, or consider your partners or your students in your courses. So this type A user is absent from our products. So they're not checking the avalanche forecast, but they may get information from other channels or sources. So they might hear it on the radio, it might be in the newspaper or on social media or something at the trailhead. There were different reasons that people weren't using the forecast. It might be because they weren't aware that it exists as a product, or they didn't believe it to be relevant to what they were doing. So we have a snowshoer who says it's hard to believe it's relevant to them, or an ice climber who said that when they ice climb, they're not checking that information. Our next group is intentionally using the avalanche forecast, and they're using it based on the danger rating information. So they're checking for that danger rating, and they're trying to make this very binary decision to go or not, either be out there in the backcountry or stay home. So for example, one person said, I'll only go if it's fine and safe, like the risk is low. And so they express difficulty with this type of decision-making with moderate and considerable avalanche danger in the scale. And they also express that beyond the danger rating, they find the information difficult to comprehend. So they're interested in whether it's safe or not, and the additional information is hard for them to interpret. And so essentially, they're trying to make this decision at home, whether they should be out there or not, because they're really not sure what to be looking for when they're in the field. So they're trying to ensure that it's a good day to be out, because they don't want to rely on that type of in-field assessment. So they're going because they think it's generally a safe place to be that day. Okay, our next type can consider the avalanche terrain. So they're also primarily using the avalanche danger rating, but they're combining it with a consideration of terrain exposure to decide where to travel. So for example, if it's red or orange or higher considerable danger, you can still go out and do laps in the trees with your friends, and you avoid getting into those high exposure areas. So they're using this as a threshold to determine whether avalanche terrain is appropriate or not on that day. And so when they're out in the field, they're really looking for terrain. Those are the types of observations they're making. They're trying to stay away from open terrain or stay away from steep slopes. But generally, they're still challenged to make assessments in the field. So in times of uncertainty, they're deferring to more knowledgeable people. And so if someone said it in considerable danger, that don't worry, this isn't dangerous, they would probably listen to that guidance. Okay, our type D users, now we are starting to utilize the avalanche problem information. So these users are able to distinguish problem conditions. They're looking at which aspects and which elevations have an avalanche problem, and they're trying to avoid those areas. So they are opening and closing terrain based on the avalanche problems. And they're generally able to understand the implications for managing their decisions that day. It affects what time they go out and which slopes they're exposed to. But again, they're really using this information to predetermine their decisions before they go out. So they express this hesitancy and this lack of confidence in their field assessments. They say, I'm not good enough to say that's a wind slab, or they think they have generally a pretty good sense of it, but they haven't gotten feedback on those assumptions. So again, they're not as confident in that field assessment component. So that brings us to the final type in this classification, which is our type E users who can extend their evaluation into the field. So they are making, they're reviewing all of the bulletin information, which informs a starting point, which they then bring out into the field and iteratively update with a continuous assessment, which generally is how the forecast is intended to be used. So in this way, the forecast is lower priority as opposed to what they're seeing out there, and they're allowing the conditions to show them what terrain is open and what terrain is closed. And so they're able to recognize conditions different than what are forecast. And when they review the information, they're going through the full website and they're actually looking for the data that supports those generalized icons, the rating and the problem. So they're asking, why are the ratings what they are, and looking at that detailed information. Okay, so those are the patterns that I found using this coding process. To be a super nerd, one of the challenges of doing qualitative research and a critique that you could throw at me is, well, how do you know you didn't just make this up? Like, how convenient. Did you just want to write the paper and graduate? And the answer is yes, I did. But I also wanted to make sure that what I did was valid and accurate. And so we mixed this analysis with some quantitative methods. And the way these work is that we still use categories, but we run the transcripts through and we give them the value of either 0 or 1 for the presence or absence of words that people are using. And so here what we can see, this was run on when people described their planning process to us. If everyone said the same thing, both the types and all the words would be plotted at the origin at 0, 0. But what we find here is that the types are spread out into different quadrants, meaning that they were talking about different things. And when we look at the words that are most closely matched with what distinguishes them, they really demonstrate what characterizes that user type. So type B is mostly associated with a word like scale and rating. Type Cs are talking a lot more about exposure and angle, and that sets them apart. Whereas our type E users down in the corner are using more sophisticated language like analyze, iterative, and persistent, as in persistent slabs. Another way we looked at this was we ran a topic model. So we put the transcripts into this topic model and we said, look for clusters of how words are used. These are topics. This is a great illustration of a topic about assessing the hazard and managing a specific hazard. And when we had the topic model identify the topics, and then we said, okay, if you had to group these people into 5 groups based on what they're talking about in these topics, how would you do it? And I have to share this because it was so satisfying, and I love to revisit this moment as often as possible. When we gave the topic model the transcripts for when people discussed their bulletin use, it predicted the exact classification that I assigned people to using the applied thematic analysis. So this was a really fun finding and really gratifying work to do. So what we end up with when we look at this is this stage theory. So we have these 5 different types they're ordered in complexity and they build on each other. And they grow in terms of the depth of bulletin use and the degree of comprehension and the extent that they are able to apply the information. And so this operates as a stage theory, which when stage theorists give us recommendations, what do we do with this? They tell us that we should look for explanations for how people move to the next level and what defines these levels. And another exciting aspect of this work was that I stumbled upon this taxonomy from the field of education, which some of you may be familiar with. It's really well established. It's called the SOLO taxonomy, the structure of observed learning outcomes. And it really shows how people are able to grasp new information and topics in terms of learning quality. So I'm going to walk through how this kind of creates a parallel with what we found here. So at the pre-structural level, they are not sure about the subject or missing the point, which is true for our recreationists who aren't using our forecasts. At the next level, they're really able to grasp one relevant aspect and follow a simple procedure with that. So that's our type B user using the danger rating to either go or not go. At the multi-structural level, here they're able to combine two or more aspects, which in our case is the danger rating with a consideration of avalanche terrain exposure. And at the relational level, here they're really able to see this complete system and its integrated parts and how they work together, which is our avalanche problems within a complete risk management framework, including size and likelihood. At the final level, extended abstract, here where we're actually able to take information and assess it in a new context. And those are our users who are able to use the forecast as a starting point and then bring it into the field and reanalyze. And so from reading more about this taxonomy, what it shows us is that at the first three stages, what's required to move to the next is a quantitative increase of knowing more, get people more knowledge about the topic. And then at the upper stages, what's really required here is a qualitative conceptual restructuring. This is a pretty heavy lift, and I think it really sheds some important insight on how sometimes we see this divide of like, how come avalanche problems are so hard for people to wrap their head around? And it's because that's exactly what it requires, is this conceptual restructuring and a deeper understanding of the whole idea. And so what this leaves us with, we have this hierarchy of patterns of different levels of sophistication. And one thing that we've really worked on within our research is seeing these really as different contexts that people are operating in. And when we look at this, it's easy with a hierarchy to immediately think that being further along in the hierarchy is better. But what we need to see these as are just realities of contexts that people are working in. And so we can understand these as valid realities of people out there using our products. And when we look at them this way, we're able to see which of the forecast products and information is most critical for these users, what they're really dependent on using. And so we can think about designing those products in particular with these users in mind. And we can think about, for those users out there who are looking to increase their knowledge and skills with avalanche risk management, we can better help them in their progression. So since completing this work, there's been many additional equally important studies that have been done along these same lines. So here's some other colleagues of mine who have built upon this work. Pascal Higley, who's the supervisor of this program, is pictured top left. And then you can also see community local Eva Latsuo. She's also contributing to this work as we speak. And I did want to mention that John Sykes, another local celebrity, is also part of this larger research program, but here I'm featuring folks who have really worked on this risk communication aspect. It would be really exciting to share all the new developments that have kind of built upon this foundational work, but I think we'll save that for another time. But what I can do to kind of bring a teaser is talk about what's currently being worked on. So I'm still part of this program, working on a PhD. And essentially I'm trying to organize a process. From having done this first study, people were like, okay, that's great. These types of people exist. So what do we do about it? And that I found really interesting and really wanted to make a contribution to. So trying to organize a process for designing and evaluating Avalanche products and services. Ava, I want to just give a shout out to and point to how exciting her work is and will be, doing a deep dive on uncertainty. But I don't want to say more because it's really humbling to try to summarize someone else's expertise. But I hope we'll hear from her soon and someday. And there's another student that's working with us currently, Griffin, who's doing this really cool deep dive working with a specific community of users. So in Vancouver, he's engaging with the snowshoeing and winter hiking community that has really easy access to some really complex terrain, and is doing a deep dive there. So we would love to continue the conversation with you all and bring you up to speed with some of the things we're working on. Before I show you how you can stay in touch, I do really want to acknowledge the folks who really made this study I shared today possible, and give a shout out again to anyone who participated. We have had a series of follow-up surveys, and so if anyone filled one of those out, it's just really great that you've engaged with us, and we appreciate the time and contributions you've made. But here's how you can read up and follow what we're doing. Our website, avalancheresearch.ca, has a series of videos, presentations you can watch, all of our papers. We are also on Instagram, where there's some really fun tidbits that we share now and again. And if you'd like to connect with me, I have email at the SFU program, and I'm also here at APU, or hopefully out on the skin track. So I hope you'll say hi and share your thoughts on these things we're working on. Thank you so much.